Hi, everybody. Welcome to week 3 of foreign policy. I just want to apologize right off the bat because I do know that today's stuff, if you add up everything to do, it takes a little more time than usual because I'm adding a documentary from Frontline called The Dark Side. It takes about an hour and a half. So I'm going to take that into account and make Wednesday's class shorter. So if you need to sort of split it up that way, that's fine. But anyways, apologize for that, but it's just good stuff, and I can't really not give it to you. And you're just sitting around your room, staring at the wall. So stare at counterterrorism. Um, so where we're going to start here, we got a couple things we want to do today. We're going to talk about counterterrorism right after 9/11, and we're going to look at a couple things. First, what we're going to do is we're going to start with sort of talking about what was counterterrorism like in the United States before W, just very briefly. Then what W does. Then you're going to watch that video. And then we're going to talk about the extensions that George W. Bush makes to policy after 9/11 and after the Iraq War. So that's where we're going today. So we start here with pre-W counterterrorism strategies. And here's the thing. The United States was the victim of terrorism attacks in the United States. Well, not in the United States, I should say around the United States. Like U.S. Ships were bombed and some embassies were bombed in Africa. So it was a thing, but it wasn't like a big thing. The United States knew about terrorism, but nobody really thought it was going to come back to the United States. It was not a big focus for the United States at this point. 9/11 happens and obviously everything changes. But let's just start here. Pre-W counterterrorism strategies, it was largely a military strategy as opposed to a criminal strategy. So just think for a second what the difference would be if we called it something an act of war versus if we call it a crime. So obviously before 9/11, a lot of the terrorism activity that happened to, for example, as I said, U.S. Navy boats or U.S. embassies. In other words, it was overseas, so it was very much a military thing, which required a military sort of strategy. So, for example, what we'd often do is we'd send cruise missiles back and blow up something here or something there, and then it was kind of done. You hit us once, we hit you back, whoever that might be, maybe take out a terrorist camp, training camp, or maybe hit the intelligence service of a state that's supporting this, whatever that might be, as opposed to criminal. It wasn't a criminal act. It wasn't like you then get put on trial for terrorism and then go to jail. You get shot. That's what a military strategy is. And of course, we were talking about proportionate responses. They hit us once, we hit them once, and then that was sort of done. This terrorist activity was done. That clearly changes. This clearly changes. This doesn't change too much, but this clearly changes after 9/11. The W strategy changes the quantity of what's going on more than the quality. Again, other than this right here, and that's this proportionate thing, the quantity of what's happening. How we respond tends to be roughly the same thing. It's just that now we respond in much more full. One new element that happens after 9/11 is this thing called, we want much tighter, what we call Homeland Security. That's a phrase that comes up after 9/11. We're essentially, yes, we're going to be fighting terrorism over there, but we also have to protect here from terrorism. Clearly, it can hit here, as 9/11 showed. So we're going to have much tighter Homeland Security. In fact, we're going to create a Department of Homeland Security and go from there. The military strategy is continued. It's increased. It becomes, again, not just a military strike that we strike back, but it becomes the war on terrorism. Al-Qaeda is portrayed as an enemy in a war on terror. Now this is tricky language, just so you know, because the idea of war implies that it's state versus state, and we never want to call Al-Qaeda a state enemy. That legitimizes them too much. So this is a tricky conversation piece right here. Works great as rhetoric in newspapers, does not work great in terms of international law or even sort of behind the scenes conversation. And then W uses the 2002 speeches to extend this strategy a little bit more. So you're going to take a break. Well, I'm going to take a break. You're going to go watch a video, an hour and a half video. It's actually really good. And I have some questions, some rhetorical questions that I want you to think about while you're watching this. But I really want you to think about this from the perspective of the foreign policy analysis stuff that we talked about at the beginning. How do we explain why the policy was the way that it was? And remember, we talked about organizational theories, bureaucratic theories, like individual theories, that psychobiographical theories, things like that. I want you to watch this video. I want you to think about the players, the organizations, who's sitting at the table, who's not sitting at the table, why, how do the bureaucratic organizations interact with each other in sort of the wake of this. So that's what I want you to think about, is why was the policy the way that it was? It's going to tell a story, like here's what happened, but obviously it could have happened different ways. Why did it happen the way that it did? So that's what you're going to watch, and I will see you at the other side.